According to the stories told by the ancient Jewish teachers, there once was a young man who was becoming increasingly materialistic, obsessed with money and property and possessions. The local rabbi was very concerned about this, and so one day he invited the young man over to his home. And the rabbi instructed the young man to look out the back window of the house, which overlooked a beautiful mountain range. The rabbi asked the young man, "What do you see?" And the young man replied, I see beautiful mountains and valleys, trees and all kinds of animals, blue sky and sunshine." The rabbi then held up a mirror in front of the young man's face. "Now what do you see?" he asked. "I see only myself," the young man replied, wondering what was going on. "Isn't it interesting," the old rabbi observed, "how everything changes when a little bit of silver comes between you and the world?" Someone once said, material possessions are either a window through which we see God and the beauty of creation, or a mirror in which we see only ourselves. Which is it for us? The place of our material possessions in our lives, getting us onto God and life's blessings, or keeping us from all this? This is something of what I'd like to talk about this morning. Today, with the 8th commandment, God continues to focus our attention on some of the most common, down-to-earth issues of daily life, turning now to consider the issue of property, that is money and material possessions. Now, as we all well know, this is a very important subject because so much of our lives are devoted to just this. Just think about how much of your time and your energy is spent worrying about money, trying to get more money, planning on the things you're going to buy, worrying about the care of the things you already have. As is well documented, such issues are the source of more stress, more anxiety, more family problems, more divorces, more international warfare than just about everything else combined. It's a crucial topic. Yet once again, as we've observed over the past few weeks, God's instruction on the matter being characteristically terse. In Hebrew, just 2 words: no stealing. Does this say all that needs to be said about the extremely important and frequently quite messy issue of property and its proper place in our lives? What does it say? I mean, what is God trying to tell us here? How is God trying to help us to get a better understanding and use of our earthly stuff, our material possessions? Well, I'd like to offer a few thoughts, 3 basic starter rules regarding the stuff of earthly life. Rule number 1, take inventory. Right off the top, before we get down to the specific prohibition against stealing, I believe it's important to first note that the underlying initial motivation that stands behind all theft, namely the desire for more than what one has. This is where all stealing obviously begins, and likewise, this is where we all, first of all, most often begin our trouble with material things, namely we want more. Why? Well, more often than not necessarily because we really need anything more, but simply because we are failing to acknowledge and give thanks for what we already possess. A proper relationship with stuff begins with gratitude. It's recognizing what we have. Now, I know I've harped on this repeatedly in many sermons in the past, but that's just because it's so central to everything. Failing to recognize, taking for granted the gifts we already possess is the heart of so many of life's problems. As we noted last week, taking for granted the gift of your spouse is at the heart of marital problems. 4 weeks ago, it was not acknowledging the gift of our parents or children that is the source of family problems. So likewise, losing sight of all the things that we have, all that we already have, is the start of our material problems. The truly healthy, happy, well-centered person is the one who continually has a thankful heart. The person who begins and ends each day with prayers of thanksgiving, recognizing all that they possess, literally counting their blessings. Not that this magically solves all of life's problems with money and possessions and so forth. You still have bills to pay, financial worries that plague you. It's just that this is what sets you in the right frame of mind to keep you going in the right direction and keep you out of trouble. Think of it this way. When I was a kid, whenever I get like a little down, a little unhappy, especially whenever there was stuff that I really wanted but I couldn't have, my mother, she was so annoying about this, but you know how moms are. She would always tell me, she really wouldn't like seem like she's listening to what I was saying. Instead, she'd always tell me to go clean out the closet in my room, or simply clean out a desk drawer. Now, part of this, I'm sure, was simply to get me to clean out my room, But far deeper, what I learned in this, and what I believe what she was really trying to teach me, was that whenever I would clean out a closet or a drawer, I would find a whole bunch of stuff I had forgotten that I had, right? Have you ever done that? Suddenly you go from being needy to incredibly rich, and it didn't cost you a cent, right? It's a great lesson. In fact, you want to feel wealthy to the point of being embarrassed by it? Go clean your attic. Take inventory. This is the first step in having a right relationship with stuff, and most especially in this, to remember to take inventory of what really matters. Recently, I came upon the following quote. It said, "Measure your wealth not by what you have, but by what you have that you would not take money for." Measure your wealth not by what you have, but by what you have that you would not take money for. What do you have that you would not take money for? Marriage, family, parents, children, friends, career, church, home. How about your eternal salvation in Jesus Christ? This is the true wealth. Begin by setting your mind on these things, the priceless riches you possess always. Again, this doesn't necessarily solve all of life's problems, but it gets your head on straight. Remember it this way. There is an old Irish proverb that says, "Every day get down on your knees and thank God you're still on your feet." Basically, give thanks for the most basic blessings you possess. Consider the following true story from a newspaper article a few years ago. Waylon Pendergrass, age 37 of Tampa, Florida, committed a spur-of-the-moment robbery while on his way home from a late-night drinking session. A very inebriated Mr. Pendergrass forced his way into the house through an open upstairs window, filling a suitcase with cash and valuables before setting the living room on fire to cover his tracks. He then escaped through the back door and made his way home, chuckling all the way. Only as he turned the corner onto his own street, however, he discovered 3 fire engines outside his house, did he realize that in his drunkenness he had in fact burgled and ignited his own property. His only comment upon arrest was, "I had no idea I had so many valuable possessions." Says one author, "While you and I hopefully may not do anything quite that stupid, or at least nothing that makes the newspapers, there are times when we Christians all need to stop and reflect, coming to the same conclusion that Mr. Pendergrass did. I had no idea I had so many valuable possessions." Rule number 1, take inventory. Rule number 2, set a high price. Building upon this first point, I believe it's important, secondly, to note the premise that drives this commandment. The basic premise here is that material things, in and of themselves, are not particularly bad. Note that the commandment never says that there's anything wrong with property or money or material possessions. What it does say, however, is that certain ways of getting those things are wrong. The issue is how we get what we get, the cost to ourselves and to others. Specifically, the commandment tells us that we are not to take or to keep anything that belongs to someone else. Now, we can easily recognize certain obvious ways that this occurs, such as shoplifting, embezzlement, burglary, auto theft, so forth. But do we also recognize that in all the many more subtle ways it equally happens every day? For example, say on a grand scale, developed nations misusing the labor of undeveloped nations for economic gain. Societal inequality in which the haves rob the have-nots of their hope of a future through their refusal to support social reform. Or how about on a more personal scale, taking some supposedly insignificant stationery items home from the office, refusing to fully report your income to the IRS, not giving an employer a full day's work for a full day's wages. Even closer to home, always out working to make more, never believing you have saved enough away so that you never have time for those you love, or permitting financial stresses to rob your affection for your loved ones, taking things out on them. All these and so many others are just as much stealing, just as much a taking and keeping what belongs to someone else as putting our hand in someone's pocket and taking their wallet. Make no mistake that the incredible simplicity of this commandment is also its incredibly far-reaching impact. No exemptions, no qualifications, no gradations, no excuses are mentioned or accepted. It is simply no taking what belongs to another, period. Now, what's the problem with this? I mean, what's the big deal, particularly regarding some of these seemingly tiny infractions that we all commit? Well, the issue is this. Whenever we steal, in whatever, even small form that it takes, a series of things occur. First, we hurt our relationship with God. We do something that God doesn't like, and it stands between us and the Lord. Secondly, we do violence to others. We hurt them and break down the whole structure that holds us together. And thirdly, then, putting this all together, we lose a piece of ourselves. Essentially, we sell ourselves out to stuff. And in fact, God is telling us here that stuff matters, but not in the way we necessarily always understand. You know, within our faith, there have traditionally been two different basic approaches to the issue of material possessions. And these two have endlessly competed with one another. One approach says that all material things are evil, and that a person of faith should have as little to do with them as possible. This is the whole, radical denunciation of all earthly ways kind of thing. The other approach, however, argues that material goods are actually one of the primary forms of God's blessing, and thus are to be pursued wholeheartedly. God wants you to be rich. This being the whole prosperity gospel kind of thing, as that infamous prosperity gospel evangelist Reverend Ike used to say, the best thing we can do for the poor is not be one of them. Yeah, right, Well, strictly speaking, both extremes are equally misguided. In the Bible as a whole, money and possessions are not inherently bad or inherently good. They are inherently neutral. That is, material things are a vehicle, they're a tool used by each person, the use determining the meaning, good or evil. In the Bible, there are rich people who are cursed and rich people who are blessed. Poor people who are blessed and poor people who are cursed. It depends upon the person. To put it another way, as we have noted at the outset of this series, we are all essentially spiritual beings. But in this earthly life, being in human, physical form, we thus must use the physical, tangible things of this life. And how we use them speaks to who we are. This is the basic premise that drives this whole commandment. The material things are not inherently good or bad. It's what we make of them, what they mean to us, how we acquire them, what we seek from them, and what we do with them that ultimately matters. And this is the next thing this commandment is saying to us. That stuff matters. It's not insignificant. Not only are our material possessions central to our relationship with God and one of the primary ways we interact with one another, but ultimately within these two things they reveal who we truly are. We make our stuff what it is, and it in reply returns the favor, telling us who we really are if we're willing to listen. Plainly stated, more than just about anything else in our lives, our use of our wealth, our material things reveals what's really going on within our hearts. I mean, we can say this or that is what really matters to us, is what is truly important. In regards to our faith, we can say we believe in one thing or another. We can come to church every Sunday and say all wonderful prayers and sing all the hymns and recite all the pious phrases. But when it comes to what we actually do with our stuff, that's where the rubber meets the road. If you want to know who you really are, follow the money. Look at your checkbook. It is more a theological than a financial statement. And this is what this commandment is secondly asking. What is your stuff trying to say to you about who you are? What you really believe in, what's truly important to you, how you're living, the choices you're making, and most especially what you need to change that's keeping you from life. The stealing that is occurring, the stealing of life for things, the ways you are selling yourself out cheaply to stuff. Swapping eternal salvation for a couple of dollar items pocketed at work. Trading relationships for another item eventually boxed away and forgotten in the attic. Not caring what happens to someone far across the world just so long as we don't have to pay a few more dollars at the supermarket. Seeking happiness or escape in going shopping instead of facing up to real issues we need to address. Using money as a manipulative tool instead of having real relationships with those we claim to love. Hoarding possessions because we don't trust in the basic goodness of God. Perhaps you recall the following story that made the national news a number of years ago. It's a news item that plays almost like a parable. On January 8th, 1997, there was a Brinks armored car that had an accident on a highway outside of Miami, Florida. Approximately $500,000 in coins, bills, and food stamps spilled forth from the vehicle in one of the poorest areas of the state. People frantically started running around picking up the money. Now, many decided to keep the money, undoubtedly saying to themselves, like, why not? Nobody will know I took it, or everybody else is doing it. Why shouldn't I? I need this. Or, hey, nobody gets hurt by this. They have insurance, Well, while this was going on, however, a handful of the people present chose to return the money. One fireman on the scene immediately handed over a bag containing thousands of dollars. He said he felt uncomfortable even touching the money. A welfare mother returned the money that blew her way, saying, "If I didn't do this, what kind of message would I be sending to my children?" And one little boy picked up 83 cents that had rolled near his feet and went out of his way to go and hand it to the police. Yet still, hundreds of thousands of dollars remained unreturned. Who that day went away wealthy? Jesus once said, "What does it profit a person to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul?" True profit and loss. We can listen to this story just mentioned and think about what we would do in that situation. But what are we actually doing every single day? What is your life worth, and how cheaply would you sell it? How cheaply are you selling it? Look at your use of stuff. Consider what's being stolen. Rule number 2, set a high price for yourself. Which leads us into finally rule number 3, make participation the goal. One author writes, "There once was a father who took his young son to a fast food restaurant and bought him some French fries. As the two sat down at a table to eat, the father did what many fathers do. He reached over and took to take one of his son's fries. But the boy quickly slapped his father's hand and said, 'No, Daddy, those are my fries.' The father became angry. He thought to himself, 'Little jerk. How selfish can you get? I gave him those fries. He wouldn't have them if it wasn't for me. Why wouldn't he want to give me just one back to me in gratitude, that the joy of the moment might be even greater between us? I can give him all the fries he wants.' The father was just about to take the fries from the boy to punish him when he thought further. How often is this exactly the way I am with God? God has given me everything I have. I would have nothing without God. God asks for a little back, not because God needs it, but because God knows this is part of discovering the deeper joy of sharing in the experience of giving together. How often do I instead slap God's hand and say, 'No, get your own. This is mine.'" Final question here is basically this. Who owns your French fries? That is the final issue at work here. The all too common problem of confusing stewardship with ownership, believing that the goal in life is acquisition, not participation. This is finally what stealing is all about. It's about grasping. It's about wanting to hold and to possess. And this is ultimately the source of all material problems. The mistaken belief that we can possess, that we can own, rather than correctly understanding that everything we have ultimately belongs to another, namely the Lord, and that we at best only have it for a time as distributors. When we keep this in mind, everything falls into place. Blessings abound. But when we forget this, as we so often do, everything falls apart and all the blessings depart. Whenever we have in abundance what another lacks and we fail to give it to them, be it in refusing charity or offering insignificant charity in relation to our income, in this we steal. We steal from God because we are holding on to something that is not ours, what has only been entrusted to us on behalf of another. As a great Christian put it very succinctly generations ago, when someone steals a man's clothes, we call him a thief. Shouldn't we give the same name to one who could clothe the naked but does not? To put it more plainly, we are designed to give. As the great Protestant reformer Martin Luther once said, God divided the hand into fingers so that the things we seek to grasp could slip through. As with the last few weeks' commandments, this is another one, stated negatively as something we're not supposed to do. Don't steal, right? But as we've noted over the past few weeks, God is not simply trying to keep us from doing something negative. God is ultimately trying to get us to do something positive. So what is the positive restatement of this week's instruction? Well, the commandment basically is, don't take from other people. The reverse, give to other people. The final point here, giving is where life is. Think of this from your own experience. It's like, I don't know about you, but I love stuff, right? Sometimes I like getting rid of some of the stuff I have so I can go out and get new stuff, right? I love stuff as much as the next guy. In fact, sometimes I love the next guy's stuff, right? But that's a sermon for 2 weeks from today on coveting, okay? But I'm a guy, right? So of course, I love stuff. For me, it's old cars and clarinets. Can't have too many old cars or clarinets. Everybody's got their thing, right? I like all my stuff. But no matter how much I like it, I find that if I look back over my life, the things I am more proud of, what ultimately means more to me, are the times when I gave sacrificially. Something that really cost me, that helped somebody else. And I'm pretty sure that every one of us here today, if we look back over our lives, we find the exact same thing. Now, such giving is really tough. We fight it. It's not natural. This is what God's getting at here. He's saying, I give you things because I want you to be happy. Enjoy the things you have. They're a gift from me. Enjoy your stuff. But don't let things end there. It's less than half of the full blessing. Instead, as much as possible, try to increasingly focus more on giving than getting, because this is where life's real blessings are found. You find yourself part of what I'm doing. That's why I gave you the stuff in the first place, so you can participate in my great giving. Do this most especially when things get tough. As backwards as it sounds, give when you have little, because it takes charge of your stuff instead of it being in charge of you, and creates true lasting joy. You become in control and confident instead of anxious and frantic. Think of it this way. Have you ever heard the story of the two guys who in a storm at sea became shipwrecked on a deserted island? Landing on the island, the first man kept pacing around anxiously while the second man just sat against a tree, sunning himself. Witnessing this, the first man said, I can't believe how calm you are. Why are you freaking out? Don't you know that we may die here? The second man replied, I'm not worried. You see, I make $100,000 a week and I faithfully tithe 10% of that to my church. Trust me, my church's finance committee will find us. When your life is based on giving, you don't have to worry. You're confident wherever life takes you because your life is in order, right? The great Corrie ten Boom once said, I've held many things in my hands and have lost them all. But whatever I've placed in God's hands, that I still possess. The measure of a life, after all, is not its duration, but its donation. The measure of a life, after all, is not its duration, but its donation. Get focused on giving. More directed towards using your possessions for God's work than your own needs, and everything falls into place. Life's blessings abound. In closing, one author tells the following true story. When I was in Bible college, a tractor-trailer load of Tropicana orange juice was dropped off at the cafeteria every week. I wondered how a low-cost Bible college like I was attending could afford so much expensive OJ. One morning in chapel, I found out how. An older Italian man, speaking in broken English, gave his testimony. He said that he had come to the U.S. from Italy in the 20s as a young teenager with nothing but the clothes on his back. A Christian couple befriended him, and through their love, he came to know Jesus Christ as his Savior and Lord. One Sunday in church, he prayed, Lord, if you give me an idea for a business, I will be faithful to give a portion of everything I make back to your work. That very morning, the idea of fresh squeezed orange juice popped into his head, and the rest is history. Anthony Rossi founded the Tropicana Company and was faithful to give God not 10% of his income, as many faithful believers do, but 50% of his income for over 60 years. He also gave truckloads of free OJ to Christian colleges throughout the country in order to tangibly help more on to Jesus Christ as he himself had been helped. Blessed by God, and in response, blessed even more by using his possessions to be a blessing. Might we do the same? Someone once said, material possessions make a wonderful servant, but a lousy master. Which is it more often than not for you, servant or master? Make the things of this life your servant. Quit being pushed around by them. Take inventory, set the price high, and make participation the goal. You shall not steal. Let us join together in singing our closing hymn, number 399, Take My Life and Let It Be. Would you please stand?